Hi, my name is Adriana and this is my reading wrap-up for the month of April. As per usual, we will start with my stats. I read a total of 6 books in April. That was 1,312 pages with my eyeballs. The average length of my eyeball reads was 328 pages. I listened to 23 hours worth of audiobooks, and my physical TBR is at 41 books. So looking into some graphs, we'll start with the genre breakdown. We were all over the place this month, like one of everything except for sci-fi that we had 2 of. I like reading a bunch of different genres, which is fun for me. Next up is audience. 5 of the books I read were adult or general audience. 1 of them was young adult. This is pretty normal for me. I don't read a lot of young adult or middle grade. Series standing. I read 5 books that were standalones and 1 book that was a part of a series. Again, this is pretty normal for me. I typically read standalones just because I like not committing to a series. Next up is my format breakdown. Everything I read was digital, so either audiobook or ebook. I've done a lot of traveling around this last month, and carrying around a physical book is just really difficult to do. We are all digital a lot of the time. Next up is the source. Again, because I'm all digital, these were all either coming from the library or from a NetGalley ARC, so like the publisher, so all library or publisher. Next up is my star rating. I had a very good month this month. Like everything was 3-star and above, which is incredible. We had a 5-star, a couple 4 stars. Like I'm feeling really good about my reading this month, and we'll, dig into it more in the book by book breakdown, but feeling pretty good. 1 book I did not rate, I'll talk about it. Page length, I read some shorties this month. Some short books, not a lot of long books. It is what it is. We read short books this month. And then finally, year published. Everything was new within the last 5 years, and most of them within the last year. Not even within the last 4 months. I read a lot of new books. I prefer them. Before we jump into the book by book breakdown, please consider liking and commenting on this video and subscribing to my channel if you like bookish things. So the first book I finished in April was The Bullet Swallower. This is a magical realism, historical fiction vibe, Old West vibe, Bandito vibes. Very, very fun. I enjoyed this immensely. This is the story of a bandito from the 1880s? Can't remember, like late 1800s. Pretty sure it's post-Civil War. Living his life in Mexico, decides to go on a heist to try to get some money for his family, takes his brother with him, and while they are out on said heist, his brother ends up getting killed. Our main character, I am blanking on his name, Antonio maybe, gets shot through the head and miraculously lives, makes a miraculous recovery when he is found by an old woman who brings him back to health, and he kind of goes on a revenge plot story arc. And during this revenge arc, he comes to find that his family has been cursed for many generations, and he has to decide whether he is going to pass down this curse or not pass down the curse. And then on the flip side, we have his grandson, a Mexican actor in the 1960s, kind of living his life and learning more about his grandfather and kind of what's going on, and developing a movie about his story. So very fun. I enjoyed it a lot. This, I believe, is a debut for this author and is like semi-autobiographical. Like she did have a great-grandfather who was known as the Bullet Swallower. She did have like an uncle or something who was a Mexican movie star who made a movie about it, but like there's a lot of details changed up and like names are different and everything else. So it was really cool to read this very personal story to the author. It was very action-packed and soulful and just very good. I think I give this 4 stars. 4 to 5 stars. Very, very good. Very much enjoyed. The next book I finished was Vulture Capitalism. I listened to this as an audiobook, and this is the one I chose not to rate because it is like nonfiction, and I just kind of struggle with like doing nonfiction or rating nonfiction, but I would 100% recommend this if you are interested in learning more about economics and how capitalist economies function versus like socialist or communist economies function, how free market play into all those three different types of planned economies, how economies are planned, as well as some case studies into some corporations who have destroyed a lot of things. And it made me very angry. Like, this book starts off with a case study of Boeing. I'm sure a lot of people know. There's a lot of memes about it, about how Boeing planes just fall out of the sky. You can directly tie when Boeing started taking a literal nosedive. And you can tie it directly to when they were forced to merge with McDonnell Douglas back in, was that the late 80s, early 90s? But yes, Boeing went from a not small company, but a company run by engineers who were passionate about aviation and creating a good project to overnight being merged with a defense contractor who only cared about the bottom line. And turns out that messes up your company real bad. And, you know, this didn't happen in a vacuum. This was pushed for by the United States government. So, you know, just because you have a capitalist economy doesn't mean it's a free market. But yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. Like, if you are already kind of flirting with anti-capitalism, like, this will get you full-fledged married to anti-capitalism. The next book I finished was Womb City. This is a dystopian sci-fi horror about a future timeline of Botswana where people are kind of like infinitely reincarnated. Like, when you have lived a certain number of years in a body, you can like switch to another body. It's kind of a weird setup, but it's like really cool and interesting. And bodies that had previously committed crimes are microchipped in a way that all of their actions are recorded, and if they are about to commit a crime, the microchip actually stops them from committing said crime. Pretty interesting setup. Lots of really, really good world building in this story. I think this is this author's first novel, but they have written like short stories in the past. And I will say about this book, like, I think the jump from short story to novel can be really, really difficult figuring out what to keep, what to take out, because I feel like a lot of people who are used to writing short stories and then switch to novels feel like they should keep everything in. And even like they're so used to axing stuff for short stories that when they go to a full novel, they want to keep it all in. And you don't need to keep it all in. Like, there's probably a solid 20% of this book that is a little superfluous and slow. Kind of like that 25% to 50%. There's a lot in there that we didn't really need to follow. But if you can push through to 50%, the rest of the book, fantastic. And like I said, the world building is so, so good. Like, being a author, this author does an incredible job of like jumping you in right away, getting you familiarized with the world, with the implications, with what's going on. And then that last half is so thrilling and horrifying and crazy. I had no idea what was happening in this book the whole time, and I loved it. Like, I didn't know where we were headed to next, what was gonna happen. Like, this is like technically dystopian sci-fi, I think, but there's also a bit of like magical realism thrown in. Like, they're definitely blending that sci-fi fantasy line very, very hard, which is also like really fun. I love seeing the mix of like magic and technology like put together. Definitely enjoyed. I would recommend this. Like, if you are looking for something that's like kind of heavy dystopian but also horror, there's a lot going on in this book, but I really enjoyed it. Oh, I also gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I finished was The Spirit Bears Its Teeth. I listened to this as an audiobook, and I read this for the Shelf This Book Club. This was the pick from Nat Kat's Bookish Cafe for the Shelf This Book Club that is always hosted by Is Bailey Reading, and then she brings in different co-hosts who pick different books. This was definitely way outside of my comfort zone. This is like a full-on YA horror where we follow a young trans man. I think he's like 16 through some of this, as he gets sent to a finishing school that is supposed to fix like disturbed women. And so we follow his horror of being a trans man with this kind of weird fantastical power, going to basically Victorian conversion therapy. So like there's a lot of setup for really a lot of horror here. There's a lot of body horror. The author does include like a lot of trigger warnings and content warnings at the beginning of the book. But yeah, it's a lot. This book is a lot. Like, it's good, but it's not for me. Like, I could appreciate this book, but I did not have a good time. So like, compromising with myself, like this is a good book. I'm not mad that I read it, but like, I didn't really enjoy what was happening and what I was listening to. So I ended up giving this a 3-star, but it is objectively a very good book. Like if you're into horror, I would recommend this for sure. It's very well written. It's very well researched, which I think is like something else that's huge. You know, the medical experiments performed on trans people and people of color and just anybody who wasn't a white cis heterosexual man during that time period. Very crazy. I will say about this book, like I don't know if I guess like the fantasy played in at the end, but the fantasy elements never really like did anything for me. It was one of those things where like it comes in and like saves the day at the end of the book, but I don't know if like I really felt like that was earned, because like the rest of the book, the fantasy elements didn't really play a whole lot into it for me. But I don't know. It's a good book. It's horror, so I will definitely not be like reading it again or adding it to my personal library, but I can see why people enjoy it. The next book I finished was The Ministry of Time. This is a like sci-fi time travel-y kind of story where we are following a government agency in the British government who are bringing people from the past into the future, and we have what are called bridges. Like these are people who are from the present day who are helping these people from the past adjust to the present day. And again, this one like kind of starts out just kind of like generic sci-fi shenanigans and then very much turns into a thriller at the end of the book, which is fun. I do love me a good thrilling episode. This one also had like some romance going on. Like there is like, I think 1 or 2 like spicy scenes, like legitimately spicy, which I was not expecting, but was not upset by. This one I ended up giving 3.5 stars. Like, it's pretty good, and like I definitely enjoyed myself, but I think this is another debut author, and I think there was just like a couple small things that we could have like rearranged and readjusted. Also, like this author's special interest is Arctic exploration from like the Victorian time period, and that is very much not one of my special interests. So every time like we went into a huge page of text about Arctic exploration from the 1800s, I just kind of glossed over. Like, my dad was really into like the Shackleton expedition and watched a lot of like documentaries and read a lot of books about it, and I just never really cared. So it was giving me a big like, this is something from my childhood that I was like forced to read about and listen to about a lot, and I just don't care. But other than that, like I did enjoy this book. I would be interested in reading more by this author, for sure. And then the last book I read for the month was A Murder Most French. This is the second book in the An American in Paris cozy mystery series. The first one, Mastering the Art of French Murder, I read last year and absolutely loved it. So when I saw the sequel also up on NetGalley, I was like, let's go. And I loved this one as well. Like, these cozy mysteries are just like perfect. Like, they are the perfect cozy mystery. They are a great blend of like exciting action and a very competent main character. I also love the setting. We're in 1950s post-war Paris, so we get a lot of like talk about how Paris was feeling post World War II and how they interact with like the police and different government agencies, and you know, they're in a big like rebuilding phase after World War II, so there's a lot of like French kind of pride going on, and it's very good. And I guess the main hook of these stories is that the main character is the neighbor of the famous American chef Julia Child, while Julia Child is still learning how to cook from Le Cordon Bleu in Paris. And Julia Child is just a kick of a character. Like if you ever saw any of her old like cooking show on like PBS or whatever, like she is an incredibly interesting character and she's very fun to follow in a book. But yeah, I enjoyed this immensely. Like this one focuses a lot on like French wines, and I have like a slight interest in wine. Like I know some stuff about wine, so it's fun to like learn more about wine through like fun books like this. Those are all the books I read in April. It was a very good reading month. I had a very good time. So let me know what your favorite read of April was, and thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.